The year is 1789. At the heart of Europe stands a restless city, Paris. Crowded with nearly 600,000 people, it was the second largest city in Europe after London. But beneath its glittering surface, something explosive was slowly taking shape. An explosion that would change the course of history, destroy centuries of monarchy, and push the world into a new era. This was the Paris where the cries of starving people echoed beneath the golden chandeliers of royal palaces. On one side, Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette lived in the endless luxury of the Palace of Versailles. 12 miles away from Paris, the massive palace felt like another world entirely. Gold-covered halls, mirrored royal chambers, candlelit luxury, endless feasts, and the laughter of nobles. At that very moment, ordinary people in Paris were taking to the streets for a single piece of bread. Long bakery lines, starving children crying, and angry crowds shouting were slowly turning the city into a burning powder keg. When night fell, Paris became even more dangerous. Inside candlelit aristocratic salons, philosophers debated liberty, equality, and the rights of man.
Rousseau's vision demands a new social contract.
But the stability of the state relies on tradition.
Tradition will not feed the hungry masses, Marquis.
The ideas of Voltaire and Rousseau were slowly setting people's minds on fire. Meanwhile, inside hidden cafes in dark alleyways, forbidden pamphlets passed from hand to hand. Those pamphlets spoke of rebellion, the fall of monarchy, and dreams of revolution. A strange tension had begun to spread through the air of the city. People could feel that something was coming. Something terrifying and unforgettable. Then that day would arrive. July 14, 1789. An enraged crowd would storm the Bastille prison like a raging storm. That attack was not just the fall of a prison. It was a declaration of war by ordinary people against centuries of power. And from that day forward, the French Revolution would spread like wildfire, shaking not only France, but the entire world. Welcome to Paris in 1789. A city that was both beautiful and terrifying. A city where a new civilization was about to be born through blood, hunger, and rage. Using advanced AI technology, centuries-old paintings, eyewitness accounts, and historical records have been transformed into vivid photorealistic scenes. So you will not only hear history, but witness Paris with your own eyes, just before the revolution began. The shadow of the guillotine had not yet fallen over the city. The reign of terror had not yet begun. France was still a kingdom. But the wheel of time had already begun to turn. A new world was about to be born, and its birth would come through blood. Let us turn back time. This is Paris. But not the Paris we know today. The wide boulevards, grand avenues, and open urban beauty of modern Paris did not exist yet. Georges-Eugène Haussmann had not yet begun rebuilding medieval Paris into a modern city. That transformation was still nearly 70 years away. This Paris, long before the 1850s, was an entirely different world. Before you stands a medieval labyrinth. Narrow, twisting streets cut through the city in chaotic disorder. The roads were so narrow that even a horse carriage struggled to pass through. 5- and 6-story buildings leaned so close together that their upper windows nearly touched. Looking upward, the sky appeared only as a thin strip overhead. Sunlight struggled to reach the streets below. The damp streets below seemed trapped in eternal darkness. This was Paris. A city where beauty, chaos, and revolution were being born at the same time. The Seine River flowed slowly through the heart of the city. Like an ancient vein running through the heart of Paris. The bridges connecting the two sides of the river were nothing like the open and elegant bridges of today. Back then, every bridge was like a small village of its own. They were packed with shops, wooden houses, taverns, and workshops. So crowded that from a distance they looked like another street built over the river. Like the old London Bridge, they were lively, chaotic, and dangerously overcrowded. At the center of the river stood a small island, Île de la Cité. It was there that Paris had been born centuries earlier. And rising above the island stood the soul of the city, Notre Dame de Paris. The 600-year-old cathedral was more than just a religious structure. It was the very center of Paris. Its towering Gothic spires, colorful stained glass, and sky-reaching architecture cast a silent shadow over the entire city. From almost any distant street, the silhouette of Notre Dame could be seen. It felt as though the cathedral silently watched every breath of the city. But beneath the grandeur of Paris lay a harsh reality. The very first thing to strike you while walking these streets was the smell. A horrible, heavy stench of decay blended into the air throughout the entire city. Because Paris at that time had no underground drainage system. Open sewers flowed through the center of every street. People dumped waste from their chamber pots directly out of their windows. Dirty water, garbage, and human waste piled up along the streets. Added to that were thousands of piles of horse manure. The entire city depended on horse-drawn transport. Tons of filth piled up in the streets every single day. Butchers dumped animal guts, blood, and waste directly into the gutters. During the hot summer days, the smell became so unbearable that even breathing felt difficult. This was Paris in 1789. A city rotting beneath its magnificent architecture. And on top of that came an unbelievable population crisis. Nearly 600,000 people were packed into just 13 square miles. That meant more than 46,000 people per square mile. Even many parts of modern Mumbai would seem less crowded in comparison. Most ordinary Parisians lived in tiny rented rooms. Sometimes entire families, or even multiple families, shared a single room. Inside those cramped spaces, people ate, slept, and cooked in the same place. Privacy barely existed. People seemed to live only to survive. This city had nothing in common with the romantic Paris of today. The café culture, glowing boulevards, and artistic beauty of modern Paris did not yet exist. Paris in 1789 was like a medieval beast. Dirty, chaotic, overcrowded, and filled with suffocating tension. A city where anger was building like molten lava inside a volcano. And very soon, that volcano would erupt. But 12 miles southwest of Paris, there seemed to exist another world entirely. There stood the Palace of Versailles. In contrast to the mud, stench, and hunger of Paris, Versailles symbolized luxury, power, and royal arrogance. The difference between the two worlds was unimaginable. The Palace of Versailles was one of the most magnificent structures in all of Europe. With more than 700 rooms, it seemed built not for humans, but for gods. Gold covered the walls, artwork decorated every ceiling, and royal grandeur filled every corridor. And the most famous part of the palace was the Hall of Mirrors. The massive hall, stretching nearly 240 feet long, felt more unreal than reality itself. 357 mirrors lined the walls in endless rows. The candlelight from 17 giant chandeliers reflected through the mirrors, transforming the entire hall into a dreamlike world of light. Standing there, it felt impossible that the French monarchy could ever fall. Its power seemed eternal. But beyond the glittering mirrors of Versailles, the starving city of Paris had already begun to awaken. The gold-covered walls shimmered in candlelight like molten fire. The frescoes painted across the high ceilings were created by Europe's greatest artists. The artwork brought scenes of gods, war, victory, and royal glory to life. Beyond the palace windows stretched endless, perfectly designed gardens. Even the trees were trimmed into perfect geometric shapes. Across the gardens stood nearly 1,400 fountains. When the fountains flowed together, it felt as if Versailles itself was speaking through water. The Palace of Versailles was more than just a royal residence. It was a living display of power, wealth, and luxury. A stage where the French monarchy performed its glory every single day. This was the home of Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette. Around them lived nearly 1,000 nobles.
Ensure the harvest reports are accurate this quarter, Duke. We must maintain the people's confidence.
More than 4,000 servants worked daily to maintain the comfort of the royal family. And surrounding them were countless courtiers. Those courtiers competed endlessly for royal favor. Life at Versailles was built entirely on ritual and extravagance. Who could greet the king first? Who could stand beside the queen? Who would earn a seat at the royal dinner table? These were the games of power. A single smile from the royal court could change someone's future forever. And a single act of neglect could destroy it completely. But the cost of all this magnificence was unimaginable. A single day's expense at Versailles was greater than what most ordinary people in Paris could earn in an entire lifetime of hard work. Marie Antoinette, in particular, became the symbol of royal extravagance. Her gambling debt had reached nearly 500,000 livres. In today's value, that would equal several $1,000,000. Her wardrobe budget was beyond anything ordinary people could imagine. She owned more than 300 dresses. Each gown, crafted from silk, gold, feathers, and rare fabrics, looked like a work of art. Sometimes she changed outfits 3 times a day. While many people in Paris were forced to wear the same clothes for years. At the very same time, the people of Paris were struggling just to find food. Within a single year, the price of bread had nearly doubled. A simple loaf of bread cost 4 sous. And a laborer, if lucky enough to find work, earned only 20 sous a day. That meant half of an entire day's income was spent on bread alone. And if he had a family, a wife, children, elderly parents, then survival itself became a brutal struggle. Many families survived on just 1 meal a day. Some people soaked bread in water just to make it last longer. Hunger was no longer just a problem. It was slowly transforming into rage inside the people. And the greatest injustice lay elsewhere. The French aristocracy paid almost no taxes at all. Yet they controlled most of the nation's wealth. The Catholic Church in France, which owned nearly 10% of the nation's land, also lived almost entirely tax-free. As a result, the entire burden fell upon ordinary people. Farmers, workers, small merchants, middle-class families. They were the ones paying taxes, suffering from hunger, and carrying the cost of the monarchy's failures. Slowly, the people were running out of patience. Anger was building in silence. In crowded streets, noisy markets, and dark cramped rooms, an invisible rage was rising everywhere.
We will not pay that price for stale bread!
The guards are everywhere, but the people are ready!
That is why Versailles was no longer just a palace. It had become a symbol of excess, inequality, and a monarchy detached from reality. And Paris was watching everything. The starving people stared at the glowing windows of the royal palace. They heard stories of royal feasts. And with every passing day, their anger grew deeper.
They are watching us. We must distribute these tonight.
It is too dangerous. The guard patrols the Rue de Rivoli.
The city was waiting. Waiting for an explosion. And the first sparks of that explosion were beginning to burn inside the cafés. This was Café Procope. In the Paris of 1789, cafés like this were slowly becoming the birthplace of revolution. From the outside, they looked like ordinary gathering places. But inside, history itself was being transformed. Café Procope stood in the Latin Quarter. The part of Paris crowded with students, writers, philosophers, and intellectuals.
Reason must guide the state, not blind tradition.
But tradition holds the wisdom of the ages. We cannot simply discard it.
Indeed, the social contract demands stability.
Founded in 1686, the café became one of the city's most famous intellectual gathering places. For years, France's most influential thinkers gathered there. New ideas were born through the smoke rising from cups of coffee. Debates filled the room about politics, freedom, religion, and human rights.
But true liberty cannot be achieved without the dissolution of the monarchy.
Nonsense. Mirabeau himself argues for a constitutional settlement.
But by 1789, those discussions were no longer just debates. Those words were slowly turning into revolution. Voltaire visited this café almost every day. It was said that he drank up to 40 cups of coffee a day. During those caffeine-filled nights, he wrote his famous philosophical attacks against the church and authority. His pen was more dangerous than a sword. Because he taught people how to doubt. He taught them how to question. Jean-Jacques Rousseau also joined long debates there about freedom, society, and the natural rights of mankind. In his voice lived the dream of a new world. A world where no king or church could take away humanity's natural rights. And Denis Diderot sat at one of these café tables editing his famous encyclopedia. A massive collection of knowledge, science, philosophy, and reason. Which later became one of the greatest achievements of the Enlightenment.
This injustice cannot stand. The people demand representation, not platitudes.
Representation is not enough. We must dismantle the entire structure.
Inside the walls of these cafés, new ideas were being born. New ways of thinking. New rebellion. But by 1789, the cafés of Paris were no longer just intellectual gathering places. They had become filled with radicals.
Le peuple ne supportera plus cette tyrannie. La liberté nous appelle.
Aux armes, citoyens!
There were now more than 1,800 cafés across the city. And they were no longer places just for drinking coffee.
King must be tried. The evidence is right here in these papers.
Enough of this baseless accusation. We are creating enemies where there are none.
They were slowly turning into political battlegrounds. Plans were being made inside them. Fierce debates happened here. Secret news, banned pamphlets, and anti-monarchy speeches spread through these cafés.
Le roi doit céder. La Bastille est tombée. La liberté nous attend.
Ceci est la nouvelle brochure. Cachez-la vite.
Some cafés functioned like political headquarters. Some were debating chambers. And others became centers of conspiracy. Inside Paris, revolution was no longer a hidden idea. It was slowly becoming organized. One of the centers of that growing fire was Café de Foy. Located inside the gardens of Palais Royal, this café would soon stand at the center of history. July 12, 1789. A hot afternoon filled with tension. Crowds slowly gathered around the café.
Read this. The king's soldiers are marching on the city.
It cannot be true. We must warn the others.
Fear could be seen in people's eyes. Rumors spread through the city that the king was gathering troops. At that moment, Camille Desmoulins suddenly climbed onto a table. Excitement covered his face. Fire burned in his eyes.
Arms, citizens! To arms! The royal troops are preparing a general attack. We must repel them and defend our liberty. To the Bastille!
He shouted loudly. The king is gathering troops to kill us. Within moments, the crowd exploded. Fear turned into anger. People began searching for weapons.